Hezekiah had this wonderful reign, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and all these wonderful and good things happened. And then his son came to the throne after he died. His son was Manasseh.
Yeah.
And Manasseh did more evil than any other king of Judah before or since.
That is so
And
heartbreaking.
it's heartbreaking, and I'm like, why does somebody as godly as Hezekiah have a son at the opposite end of the pendulum, very opposite end,
Mm.
like Manasseh? It said he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood from one end to the
Mhm.
other.
Mm. Mm.
And, it's so troubling to see that, but you're like, how does that happen? How does that happen?
Good morning, everybody. This is Elliott, the creator and founder of HomeschoolingTorah.com, and I'm here with Christine Miller. She's a blogger at alittleperspective.com, and she's the author and publisher of all kinds of amazing history and Bible study books at nothingnewpress.com. Good morning, Christine.
Oh, hello, Anne. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. You should see, I always talk about the weather, but you should see the difference. It was just a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about snow outside, and then suddenly it's warm or after the feast, and it's 79 degrees in my bedroom where I'm recording right now, and we don't have air conditioning, so I'm just like, okay, it switched.
Oh, my goodness.
Of course, 79 for
Well,
you might freeze.
uh, actually, that's not funny. That's actually true. I don't think it's quite that warm here, but it will get to be that by the afternoon. We've had some nights where we can sleep with the windows open, which I always love.
Yes. Yes, we
And
do
then
too.
we went to the beach yesterday morning
That
for a
sounds
couple
gorgeous.
hours. We tried to go on Sunday, and of course, everybody in Sarasota County had the exact same notion. We couldn't
Yes.
find a parking place for miles. So I did all my Monday work on Sunday so that we could go to the beach yesterday, and we did. And there was nobody there. It was deserted like a ghost town, and it was wonderful.
Oh, for sure. Well, we could go to Lake Michigan if we wanted to, but the wind is just gusting in Michigan today. So I think all we get is a face full of sand, and the water temperature is like probably still in the high 40s, low 50s. So it's not quite the same in Florida. So we might wait.
It's not like waiting in the Gulf of America, is it?
No. Exactly, exactly.
Oh, it's
So,
it's wonderful. It's one of my favorite things to do here, walk along the shore. I love
mm.
it.
Well, I remember when we were down in Florida and we would walk along the beach and have long talks, which is you're kind of leading, you didn't mean to, but you're leading into what we're going to talk about today because I've been pondering how do we teach our children, and long walks was on my mind, but around here we just go through the woods, and try not to get mosquito bitten.
Yes.
But I mean, along the beach, that sounds like a great place to walk with your kids. Do you walk with your
Yeah.
grandchildren along the
Uh,
beach? Your
yes, we
grandson?
haven't actually we haven't recently, but we will be starting up again shortly.
Wonderful.
We did a lot last year. We went to the beach, and the thing is with David, who's our local grandchild who lives here, who we get to see all the time. He's
Yes.
2.5, and he loves the water. And so last year when we took him to the beach, it was a little challenging because he just wants to run right in. And of course, you can't let him do that.
No, no.
You gotta keep him on a pretty short leash. So this year, when we start taking him again, it should be a lot better. He's older.
For sure. Wow, there's a lot of lessons here. Okay, so we're going to talk about wisdom in parenting today. And I was pondering yesterday what verses to share, and my husband actually mentioned a verse on Sabbath, and he mentioned Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs 1 verse 7. The fear of Yehovah is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. My husband actually taught on that a little bit on Sabbath, and he just briefly touched on it. He was talking about how if we want to start teaching our children, the place to start is with helping them learn to fear us and not in any, you can just feel the audience saying, wait a minute, that's not so good. How are kids? They're not supposed to fear you. You're supposed to like snuggle with your kids all the time, and they're never supposed to fear you.
Except I remember times when I was a kid where, I knew that when I was a kid in the 60s, it was a lot different than today. We would, in the summer especially, we'd pile out the door right after breakfast, and we'd be gone playing in the neighborhood all day.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't even see the inside with our friends, and we wouldn't even see the inside of the house again until evening. So, and my parents, and this was normal. Nobody ever worried about what your kids were doing or where they were back in those days.
Mm-mm.
And my dad, when supper was ready, he would stand on the front step, and he had a very distinctive whistle. He was a good whistler, my dad. And sometimes, I can't quite remember it now, but I used to be able to remember it. My dad passed away in 1998. He had a very distinctive whistle, and he could be loud too. And he would whistle his distinctive whistle on the step. And when we were playing out in the neighborhood all day with our friends, we could go anywhere we wanted, only we had to stay within earshot of the whistle.
Yeah.
And the minute we heard that whistle, drop everything and go home. If we didn't drop everything and go home the minute we heard that whistle, boy, were we in trouble.
Yeah.
But we did.
Absolutely.
Now, the whistle meant time to come home. Dinner's ready. And so we would go home to have dinner. Okay. So the thing is that, that was a rule of my dad. That was one of my dad's rules. And I suppose you could get tempted to just keep playing and ignore the whistle when you heard it. But I never would entertain actually doing that, because I know that if I did, it would go hard for me when I got home.
Yeah. Yes.
I would make my dad unhappy. I did not want to make my dad unhappy. I did not want to get punished or disciplined. And so when I heard that whistle, I went home. And that's the fear. That's a healthy fear. That's a normal fear. That's a good fear. That's a fear that children should have of their parent. Otherwise, they'll be running off with strangers and dashing into the middle of a busy street. You don't want that.
Mm-hmm. Which is why I was thinking, when you're walking on the beach with your grandson, of course you can't let a 1.5-year-old run out into the ocean. That's just common sense. Of course, in his mind, it probably is very, very mean. How dare you? That's so mean. I've been thinking about wisdom also, because sometimes I know we write curriculum, and I'm sure you do this too, but do you ever have those moments where you second guess everything and you think, well, maybe we should just have a curriculum where we're not so hard on the kids. We don't make them do so much. We'd be easier on them, and they wouldn't have to work so hard all day. And I'm not saying we should work our kids all day either, because that's certainly not how we do it. But, those math problems are hard. My son's in not geography. He's in geometry right now. And it has its days, where you can just see the look on his face of, do I really have to do this? And why do we make our kids struggle and do these hard subjects? I mean, I don't know that I've ever needed geometry in life. I'm not like an architect or a scientist or anything, but yet I do know there is actual value in learning geometry, especially the logic skills and just learning to think critically. But why do we have to make our kids struggle? Why do we have to make them memorize multiplication facts? And why do we Why do we have to do these hard things? How does this help them develop wisdom?
So when we impose an academic discipline and a standard of excellence on our kids in their studies, it's not always about that particular subject, whatever the subject matter is, and whether they're going to use it later in life. A lot of times, learning the subject matter of a subject teaches other things than just those facts and those relationships. It teaches you how to discipline your mind. You mentioned logic. It teaches logic and critical thinking. It teaches you are ultimately teaching your kids how to identify truth from falsehood, which is something they are going to need every day of their lives when they get to be adults. You know, it's not just about that subject matter. It's using that subject matter as a tool to train you how to think properly and truthfully and logically. And also, you know, you see these kids, maybe not homeschooled, more public school kids, but they were raised in public school, and you see them on social media sometimes and stuff like that. And they've had everything handed to them, and their teachers sympathize with them, and they don't make them do hard things, you know, and they don't make, when they interview them, the interviews that I've seen them on YouTube and stuff like that, they don't even have common sense.
No.
They don't make logical sense. In their mind, what they're saying, I'm sure it's completely wonderful, but a normal person listening to them is listening to them going on, and they're thinking, what? What am I
Right.
listening to? You know, they don't have discipline, they don't have thinking skills, they don't have common sense. And these are all things that that kids who are, I guess the word I want is, they're shielded from having to do hard things. They don't learn those. You know what this reminds me of? Back when I was homeschooling, something I learned, our word education, it comes from a Latin word. It's like a lot of our vocabulary words do. It's from Latin.
Yes.
And the root of it is that educar. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but it's CARE or CARA. That's the root. And it means to lead in Latin. Okay, the front of it, the edu part, means to lead. That's a preposition that's added on, like as Latin does, and it means out of. To lead out of.
Okay.
Now, okay, so what's this out of? What are we leading our kids out of? Well, when children are born, they're born into a state of their mind that receives everything uncritically and without thinking. And, you know, you see it in the little babies in their eyes, how they've got these big eyes, and you can just see the innocence in their sweet little face. They receive everything, you know, and it's, and actually that's a blessing from God, because you have that little person, and you can teach them by your example, and they soak up like a sponge whatever their parents are doing. Right? I mean, Jesus said, the son does what he sees his father doing. You know, that's a gift from God. You know, it makes, if the father is walking in the ways of Yehovah, it's a blessing that your son will follow in your footsteps.
Absolutely.
They're born that way. That's what they do. That's automatic for them. So they are born into a state of uncritical thinking, of just receiving everything in the world. However, that's a problem, because we live in a fallen world, and there's people out there who are spouting nonsense and saying ridiculous things, and and also the enemy with his lies, and we don't want them to receive all that uncritically, right?
Correct.
So they're born into a state, and education leads them out of the state that they're born into. Now, with modern education, I don't think it's this way in the rest of the world necessarily, but in America, with the modern public school system, they have what they're doing is they're trying to leave the children into the state in which, leave them there, not lead them out of it, but leave them in it. The reason they want to leave them in that state is because then whatever you hear on the news or read in the newspaper or whatever, politician stands up and says something, you just accept it, unquestioning.
Yes.
So they want to raise a generation of children, or several generations, whatever. They want to raise children left in that state so that they become compliant. So when somebody stands up and says, you have to vote this way, and this person's bad, and, or we want this or whatever, go to this protest, they do it.
Yes.
They've received their instructions uncritically, and so they aren't able to discern truth from falsehood. Now, one of the things that education does, a good education should do, is make you uncomfortable. Maybe you're reading a book and it's not one of these pansy books. It's one of these great books that makes you face maybe a scenario that you haven't thought of before, or emotional, depth that you don't get to experience in your everyday life, in your home. And it's uncomfortable. But what does it do when something like that happens? You read stories in the Bible.
I was just going to say the Bible.
They're uncomfortable, aren't they?
Very much
you have
so.
to grapple. You have to grapple with instances of God telling Israel to wipe out all the Canaanites, and of somebody taking your Lord and Savior who never did anything wrong and crucifying them on a cross.
Yes.
These are uncomfortable stories. And so, but what does it do when a child is not shielded in that way, so that their mind has to start asking questions? They stand back. They have to stand back from whatever is in the register of their mind, and they have to ask those questions. And they start asking those questions. How do you get your child to stand back in the register of their mind and look at what's there and ask questions about it? That's what you want. That's education. That's what you lead them out of.
So what's the way we get them to think? How do we get them to think, besides just maybe reading on their own before that?
So all of the things that we have in our academics, like math and grammar and language and spelling, all these things require them to learn something, to take something and apply it. So you might learn in phonics that the EA vowel team has these rules and blah, 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 and this is how you pronounce it when you're reading out loud in this situation and that situation, and this is how you spell it, and so forth and so on. And these are the rules that govern this vowel team. And you learn those things, but then when you're reading out loud or when you're taking a spelling test or whatever, you have to remember what you've been taught, and then you have to apply it to that particular question in your worksheet, or that particular thing that you're learning, or that particular spelling test that you're taking. Okay, it's not so much that you're trying to produce spellers who are always completely accurate and never make a mistake. I mean, everything that adults use in the world today has spell checkers on it.
Exactly.
You know, exactly. Same with math. We have calculators. Why do we have to memorize all this stuff? Because the act of making a person, a child in this case, take facts and apply them teaches you how to step back and think about what you're doing. Those activities help your mind learn how to step back and consider. And so it's not so much that we're trying to bring cursive back into society, or that we're trying to memorize every last math fact that there is. Those aren't necessarily the high goals.
No.
Those are tools that just in the process of doing those things teaches a child's mind to ask questions, to stand back and ask questions. Same with reading. You know, this is why we want our kids to read.
Yeah.
We want them to read a wide variety of things, of novels and historical fiction and biographies and all this stuff, because of good literature, because it teaches your mind, you're training your mind how to receive and how to respond. And that's the other thing that I love about reading, lots and lots of reading. Because you could be reading in a book and your hero in the book, whoever it is, runs into some kind of a situation, some trouble or something, and they have to get out of it. And plus, you could be in another time, a different era, a different country. You know, you are faced with scenarios where the people in your stories are problem solving, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And your children are learning how to problem solve in these maybe life and death situations without actually having to be put into a life and death situation themselves.
So can I give you an example?
Yes, I would love an example.
Our high school students at Homeschooling Torah, we have a literature and grammar and writing and speech class. We do all of them. And we meet on Zoom once a week, but during the week, the students read literature. And right now we're reading a novel. It's called The Hidden Hand. It's from the 1800s. And the heroine in the book has gotten herself noticed. Well, she's been noticed by this evil criminal, okay, who is planning to abduct her, steal her into the mountains of, it doesn't actually say where they are, but I'm going to guess like West Virginia or something. I'm going to steal her away and make her his slave, and it's terrible. And she's a Christian. And it's not like an overt theme in the book, but she does pray, and she does, she'll ask herself basic questions like, well, what would the Lord want of me, kind of questions. And she doesn't realize she's going to be abducted. But one of the things we do in the curriculum, the vocabulary in the 1800s is significantly higher than the vocabulary we find in modern times.
Absolutely.
And it's mind-blowing because this book was originally written as a serial novel where in the local newspapers, well, probably New York City, Washington, D.C., and so on, the big cities, they would have the newspaper, and every edition of the newspaper would have another chapter of the novel. And so people would want to buy the newspapers. This is for your common workers. This was not for smart, educated people. This was, your normal, everyday people, immigrants even. And the vocabulary is so hard. And in one of the things that's my job to do as the curriculum developer is to find the vocabulary words that I'm quite sure that a modern teenager would have no idea what that word means. And so then I have activities for them to do with the vocabulary so that they can actually understand the novel. And in last week as this girl was being about to be abducted, the paragraph that was leading up to all the tension, there were probably 10 words that I had never heard of. I was like, what in the world? I have no idea what they're saying. So I started looking them up in Merriam-Webster's dictionary just because it was handy on
Mhm.
my computer. And wow, it was basically saying that this evil villain was demon possessed. He was a sorcerer. He was into witchcraft. And I would not have known that. And what was fascinating is that the descriptions of someone involved in witchcraft, I know this is in the 1800s and a serial novel to go in the newspaper and it was just supposed to get lots of thrills, but it was so instructive. I was thinking, well,
Wow.
it described him as a flatterer. He was laying traps that, she would need to watch for as the devil himself was coming after her. And I was like, well, I just got myself a Bible lesson today. I mean, it was so good. It was so good. I thought, there is so much instruction in this chapter that was just going to be in the normal everyday newspaper in the United States in the 1800s that I was incredibly blessed by it. And I mean, that's an example of we're reading and our kids have to think critically. And a lot of times they have to struggle with these very difficult vocabulary words. And most of the time we would just toss the book aside and never even read it. And it was so good.
Right. I mean, that's a prime example. And that's why, I mean, how are kids in modern day America ever going to use any of those vocabulary words that you just learned when nobody uses them, anymore, and it's not anything that you come across. It's not the fact that you're going to use them or not. It's the fact that you're chewing on it what am I trying to say? You're chewing on it
Yes.
uh,
Like a cow
it's
chewing
a
her
task.
cud.
Well, exactly. It's a task that you're chewing on that has benefits more than just, whether you've learned some esoteric word that you're never going to use ever again. You're like you said, you've got this deep instruction and biblical lesson and wisdom and everything else that was inherent in it. This is why we ask hard things of our kids. And the same thing goes with chores, for example. When our kids were little, we had a little homestead in Colorado, in the foothills of the Colorado Rockies, and we had a big garden, a 1/4 acre, and we raised chickens and we had dairy goats, and our kids had chores every morning. We had dogs and we had a dog and cats, and they had to take care of the animals. And they helped with the garden weeding and whatever in order to maintain the house. They helped with laundry and cooking and everything. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, none of my kids have dairy goats these days, so why did they have to learn how to take care of dairy goats? I mean, it wasn't necessarily having to do with that particular activity and whether you were going to use it in your adult life or not. You're learning responsibility and empathy. I mean, when you care for somebody, even if it's a livestock or a pet, caring for another thing is a wonderful thing to teach your kids, because you're teaching them empathy and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
Responsibility, following through, finishing a project that's been
exactly.
started,
Oh,
entrepreneurship.
and here's another one. How about doing what you're asked to do with a good attitude?
Oh, yes. Fantastic. Yes. Basic character skills that are not
I
common.
mean, not common. So our middle son, he's turning 40 this year. And his job in his company that he works for a manufacturer here in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a business development executive. What that
Nice.
means is he's over 13 sales reps in his country that have territories from it's not the entire Gulf Coast of Florida, but it's pretty much the whole entire Gulf Coast of Florida down to Naples, which has the most population in it on our side of Florida. So it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of territory that he's over, these sales reps. And, you know, he never went to college. He was homeschooled. We didn't teach him sales or business development, executive skills, whatever that is, or anything else. You know, what we taught him was responsibility, initiative, following directions with a good attitude, you know, entrepreneurship, timeliness, respect, you know, all of these things that you learn that are good qualities and good virtues that you learn when you're raising your kids, that your kids learn. And, you know, the thing is how has he gotten so high up in his company? Well, his bosses are like, you know, nobody else does the things that you do. You know, they recognize responsibility and respect and initiative and, you know, working hard and not complaining and all that kind of stuff. Those are things employers are looking for. And when an employer finds somebody with those qualities, it doesn't matter what you don't know. They'll pay you to send you to school, you know, or whatever else. They want to keep you because you are a valuable member of the organization. And our son, I'm not trying to brag about my son, but his area of that he's over regularly makes the most profit for his company of the whole entire state of Florida, of anybody else in that company. And I'm proud of him, but I recognize where that comes from. You know, that comes from, of course, I believe the blessing of God's put a blessing on his life. I totally believe that. But, and also because of how he was raised to see these qualities and these character traits as normal and desirable.
Yes, absolutely.
And he went through geometry too. Does he use geometry? I don't think so. But he learned how to think critically. You know?
Right. I think learning and studying scripture is probably it's called, what is it called? The king of theology. I'm not saying that quote right.
It's the queen of the sciences.
The queen of the sciences. I knew you'd know it. Yes. And studying our Bibles helps our children learn to discern between truth and lies, between good and evil, and just between common sense and foolishness. I mean, it's not all about theology, but it does train them as they observe the people in the scriptures and see the good examples. And honestly, there are probably more bad examples than good. It helps them to discern, wait, that's not how I want to live. And honestly, I think that's what wisdom is really having that discernment between what is bad and what is good. I feel like that's what wisdom is. And we start with knowledge. That's what the scriptures say. That's the beginning is knowledge. And then we get understanding, which might be like more of a skill to apply knowledge, what we've been learning. And then after that, we've got wisdom, which is beyond skill. Anyone can be a chef. If you could learn the skills to do it, but then there is wisdom that helps you discern. You could take the chef all the way up to a Michelin star restaurant because he's got the wisdom to discern the best path to take everything in his life, you know, and that's a terrible example maybe, but
here you brought up a good point when you started talking about wisdom. So the Hebrew root word for understanding.
Okay.
I think it's B-I-Y-N if you were to translate it into, transliterate it into English letters. I actually haven't looked it up. I know I've got it on my website somewhere.
Yep, I'm finding that too. I'll make sure we link it for everybody.
Okay, so it's the bit is the floor plan of the tent, right? If you're going back to the pictographs, and then you've got the vav, which is the tent peg, And then the
Mm-hmm.
nun is the seed
That
for the
continues.
children.
Yep.
Yeah, to continue. Okay. So the parable, so this is in a study I did of Proverbs 1, Hebrew root words. I
Cool.
will send you the link after we're done talking. But, to comprehend, because in Proverbs 1:2 it says to comprehend the words of understanding, to understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. Okay. So to comprehend, this is also the root of understanding. To comprehend is the verb, understanding is the abstract concept, okay? But the
Yes.
verb is the root of it. All right, so it's a B, in English transliteration, B-I-Y-N, a bet, a yud, and a noon.
Okay.
So in the era of the patriarchs, this is from the ancient Hebrew lexicon, the tent. So remember that the bet is the floor plan of the tent, right? It's the house or the family.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The yud is a closed hand, and the nun, of course, the seed, what we were talking about. The tent was usually divided into two parts, one part for the females and the other part for the males. And the wall makes a distinction between the two sides. So the parable is the house or tent, that's the bet, that was closed off, which is the yud, because the hand is closed. It's a closed hand, so it signifies being closed. According to the genders determined by the seed, the nun. To understand is the ability to discern between two things. That's what the Hebrew root word is telling you.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I'm just laughing because of our society.
I know, right?
I saw a funny meme on Facebook recently, and I'm not sure, I might slaughter it, but basically the idea was you could buy a t-shirt on Amazon that was on the front of the t-shirt was saying, you can choose, do you want to be male or female? You can choose. And then underneath the t-shirt, there was a drop down asking if you wanted to buy a man's shirt or a woman's, like man's size or a woman's size. Like, you can play around with it all you want to, but to practically buy this t-shirt, you're gonna have to pick which one you really are.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, I know.
So our children do not have, our culture does not have understanding. It literally doesn't. Knowledge, what does Daniel say at the end of the book of Daniel? At the time of the end, knowledge will increase, or I'm going to slaughter that verse too.
Yeah, I
running
know
around
exactly what
after
you're
it.
talking. Right, right. And it's also something that it says in the New Testament about, I always apply it to science, but there are people who are always seeking for the truth but never arriving to it.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's in Romans 1.
Isn't that's a good description for science, because science, they talk about the science is settled. Science is never settled. Science is not settled. That verse, I mean, you should put it in the dictionary after science, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're pursuing the truth, but you can never arrive to it. That's because, and it's not because it's not knowable. It's just because it's so deep and so vast. God is the author of science. He's the one that built the universe. And the farther out you go, the farther there is you discover there is beyond that, or the deeper in you go, the deeper you discover that there is even beyond that. I mean, scientists finally were able to see inside of a cell and it took hundreds of years to develop a microscope powerful enough to see inside of a cell. And what's inside of a cell? All of these working parts that now, and you look inside of those working parts, and there's still other things in there that are smaller, and you have to have more and more magnification to keep seeing what you're looking at. And the more magnification you get, the more you find in there that you didn't know was there before, and you need even more magnification to see that. And so it's it's a never-ending pursuit, is what
Yes.
I'm saying.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, you find God's wisdom in every single one of these things, and then you've got scientists who are like, "Oh, God doesn't exist." Yeah, what are you looking for then? I mean,
Right. Right.
what are you looking at? You can't even tell that the complexity that you're looking at was designed. I mean, you go to Jeremiah 1:8, and it says, or no, it's not 1:8. It's 8:9. The wise men are ashamed; they are dismayed and taken. Behold, they have rejected the word of Yehovah, and what wisdom is in them?
Wow. Okay, I
Wow,
was
isn't
thinking
that
of a
the truth?
verse as well. Um, you were saying the one from Romans 1, they are ever learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And then what is truth? His word is truth. His word is truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's
And
even
so,
that. You can dive to the bottom of the Bible and you're still scratching the surface, right?
oh my gosh, tell me about that. So, um, I've been reading the Bible every day since I was 5 years old. So that's
Mm, that's a long
49
time.
years now. No,
Yes.
59 years, every day for 59 years. You realize I'm discovering more treasures today after reading it over and over again for 59 years than I ever knew even 10 years ago was in there.
I do believe you. I do.
And,
I do.
and there is no, I mean, Anne, if all I did during my day was open my Bible and that was it until I finally went to bed at night, as
Yeah.
it is, I probably spend about 3 or 4 hours a day studying the Bible. And that is not enough time
No.
to dive into everything. It's not. I mean, I'm trying to discover the Hebrew root word parables and the chiastic structures and all this kind of stuff. Learning you talked earlier about when children read the Bible, and a lot of times they learn not just the good things, but the bad things that people do too. And this is something, one of the teaching tools of Scripture is comparison and contrast.
Yes,
And
that's
this
wisdom,
God
understanding.
uses this, the ability to discern between two things, right?
Yes.
Um, and and so you've got what the wicked do and what the righteous do, and what the foolish do and what the wise do. And Scripture frames it this way on purpose because it is giving your children the ability to discern between two things. And so it makes a distinction between one or the other. And comparison and contrast is one of the most often used teaching tools in Scripture. And anyway, I mean,
No.
yeah, I mean, if I lived for another 200 years and could do nothing except 12 hours a day except for study the Bible, I would not. I would maybe get to the end of Genesis,
I'm
possibly.
not even sure. Not even, I don't know. It's kind of like the universe. It's just never ending. I think,
It is. The deeper you
yeah,
look, the more there is to see.
yes. My husband's a pastor, and so we
Yes.
have many people coming to our Sabbath congregation. Some of them have been reading the Bible their whole lives, just like you, and they know it in and out. Now, maybe they've never noticed the Torah or understood the Torah, so they're new maybe to some of those things and how it would apply to them, but they're much more grounded. And then other people may have just only heard of the Bible in the last year, never opened it in their entire lives. And it's very similar to the process of having a new baby. And they it says in the book of Acts, James tells the all of the other apostles and disciples and people to that Moses will be read every Sabbath day in the synagogue. And that
Mm-hmm.
was
Mm-hmm.
the tool to train up baby new believers and baby, and only they're babies because they haven't learned to discern. Their eyes are open, like you described, and they're accepting everything that they hear. And they have to learn to discern, does what I just heard match scripture, or does it go against scripture? And until we have to repeat the Torah and the prophets and the New Testament over and over and over and over our whole lives, because the layers start to build and the discernment muscles get exercised until we finally can. Well, I don't know if we ever get to the finally. Okay, scratch that word. Until we finally become a little bit more mature, a little bit more grown up, and then we reproduce and try to teach somebody else how to discern, and we mentor them. And so the beauty of a family and homeschooling is that the picture evolves over into our local congregations, and into so many other things as well. Apprenticeship model in business, apprenticing, like you said, your son didn't go to college, but because he had a work ethic, they taught him what he needed to know, and now he's at the top of the company. We take people under our wings and we teach them to discern in the same way that we learned. And it's not clean and neat and tidy with everything in a little box for 180 days over this many years, but it's relationship. But on the other hand, it's not just letting them run free. It's not just saying, oh, well, if people don't understand truth, I guess that's the way it is. And we just leave them be in there and stuck in their deception. We try to go rescue them and help them. So there's a balance, right? Sorry
Yeah,
to
and
ramble.
actually, that's a good point you bring up about a balance, because I think that also applies in homeschooling. You've got the children that are in public schools and they sit at their desks for 8 hours a day. Our experience with homeschooling is that the children had desk work or book work maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. And then that was the academic part of their education. And then, they still had reading to do and things like that, but they also had free time where they could pursue their interests. We never just sat them down in front of a TV and let them play video games. They could paint, they could garden, they could learn about computers or electronics, or they could do woodworking or learn how to use tools. I mean, we spent so much time on nature hikes, and I always had my identification book with me. We identified everything: animal tracks, plants, flowers, the different kinds of leaves on the trees, and you name it. I mean, we spent vast amounts of times in the woods, and that's good for kids. That's good does any of my kids use that stuff today? No, I don't think so. However, that was not a waste of time.
No.
And I think that's a very good thing to have. Sometimes homeschoolers can be pressured into thinking that if their kids aren't at their desk or at the table doing book work 8 hours a day, then you're failing. No, you're not failing.
Exactly. Yeah. My favorite, oh boy, I always say everything's my favorite verse. My husband actually teased me about that a couple of days ago. He's like, oh, I just heard you say you have another favorite. How many favorites do you have? Well, one of my top favorites is Deuteronomy 6, verses 7. Well, 6, let's go start at 6. It says, these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently, I love that word, to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, looking at plant identification, when you lie down. Oh, I love sitting when they lie down. I mean, all the bedtime stories. And when you rise up, early in the morning with their chores, and they're learning responsibility. It's just, I love that verse. I love it. It applies to literally every subject that I write about.
It does. It does. And you know what? I was just thinking the other day, so right now in Bible for Beginners, we're in 2 Kings. We're almost to the end of 2 Kings, which means the Babylonians.
You're flying.
The Babylonians are going to come and destroy the temple in a couple of days. So,
no.
Yes, I'm sad about that. But We just had this story of Hezekiah, who experiences this awesome miracle where the Assyrians are encamped around Jerusalem, threatening Hezekiah and they're saying to the people, don't let Hezekiah deceive you into thinking that your God is going to rescue you. Oh my gosh. It's exactly how the enemy talks to us today, word for word. And so Hezekiah had this wonderful reign, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and all these wonderful and good things happened. And then his son came to the throne after he died. His son was Manasseh.
Yeah.
And Manasseh did more evil than any other king of Judah before or since. He even exceeded the house of Ahab. He even exceeded the Amorites and the Canaanites that were displaced out of Israel, displaced out of Canaan before Israel got there. They were so bad.
That is so heartbreaking.
And it's heartbreaking, and I'm like, why does somebody as godly as Hezekiah have a son at the opposite end of the pendulum, very opposite end, like Manasseh? Of course, Manasseh repented at the end of his life and tried to undo all the evil that he'd done. They have a tradition in the Hebrew scholars that he took the elderly Isaiah, who was the main prophet all during Hezekiah's reign, and sawed him in half with the saw to kill him. That was Manasseh who did that. It said he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood from one end to the other. And, it's so troubling to see that you're like, how does that happen? How does that happen? But then Manasseh's grandson, Josiah, we're just reading about today, he sends workers to repair the temple, and they find the book of the law, which had been lost. And you know what? I don't think during Hezekiah's reign they knew where the book of the law was. But they didn't know where it was. How was Hezekiah able to talk to Manasseh when he got up, when he laid down, when he went in, when he went out, all the words of the book of this law? That might have been how. It might be one factor. We don't know how it happened. We're guessing. But it might be one factor to explain how somebody as godly as Hezekiah could end up with a son like Manasseh. Don't you think in all your years of parenting, isn't that the key verse for parents, for fathers in raising your children?
Yeah, hands down, it's the key verse. It gives us wisdom as to how to do it, when to do it, what to talk about, and that it first in verse 6 has to be on our hearts first, which that's a hard one. Yeah. I mean, it's very convicting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm in agreement with you. I think whatever failures as parents that we personally experienced, I think we can trace it back to that verse.
Yes. And
because when we were raising our kids, we weren't Torah observant. We didn't realize the whole, we just went along and believed everything that we'd ever learned in church was that you can ignore all this. You can ignore the first 5 books. It doesn't have any bearing on your life today.
Yeah.
And and the thing that I could tell young mothers, if I could tell them anything, please take that verse in Deuteronomy seriously. It is the foundation on which everything else is built. Well, how does the law teach grace? I mean, the law teaches grace, let me tell you. The thing that's funny to me is that, we taught our kids grace. We taught our kids the New Testament. That's what we taught our kids. We taught them grace. We didn't teach them law. We didn't do Deuteronomy 6. Our church didn't do that. Our church didn't teach us to do those things. That was obsolete, right? That's what we were told.
Yeah.
And after I realized that the Bible was a unified book from Genesis to Revelation, and that all of it was not passed away, and it was all appropriate for today.
When you realized that you were supposed to see the front half of the Bible, or even the first 5 books, it like opens your eyes to everything that makes sense.
Okay.
It makes grace make sense.
Exactly. So I started studying it. Now, I had read through it because earlier in my life, because I read through the Bible every year, every couple of years. I read it from beginning to end. I believed in doing that. So I was familiar with the things that were in there, but I didn't learn it. I didn't study it. You know what I'm trying to say?
No, I do.
When I started studying Torah for myself, after having my eyes open to all this, guess what I saw? Grace.
Grace.
It's in every page. Messiah, Yeshua, he's on every page.
Yes, absolutely.
And the people who say things about Torah like it's obsolete and it doesn't have anything to teach us today. I've heard pastors over the podium say that God isn't the God of the Old Testament, who's vengeful, wrathful, angry, and judgmental, is not the God of the New Testament. I've heard them say that over the podium.
That's horrible.
And they don't know what they're talking about. They're ignorant. I'm not trying to be mad at pastors or anything else or say anything, but I'm telling you, they have not studied. You know what Moses says in Deuteronomy chapter 9? He says, God's not bringing you into your promise because you're so self-righteous. Look at all your instances of how you've been stiff-necked. And here's this and this one and that one and the other one. And he goes down the big long list of how God had to forgive them every step of the way because they were so rebellious and did not act righteously. What does that tell you? Moses isn't preaching salvation by works. He's preaching grace. He's preaching you enter your promise by grace. That's what Moses is preaching. Moses is preaching the gospel of grace from Torah, just like Yeshua preaches the gospel of grace in the Greek Testament. It's a unified message from beginning to end, and so do not be afraid to center in on the first 5 books and build that foundation deep in your children's hearts, because it teaches grace. It leads to Yeshua. And even Paul says, what does Paul say? He says, the law is our tutor to bring us to Christ.
Our tutor. It is our homeschooling curriculum.
Exactly. This is the way you want your children to get to B, get to A and go to B. This is the way you get to B.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I was thinking we could close by just going through the different seasons of our lives. And I know you and I were getting towards the older seasons, the fall and winter seasons, I guess you could say. But what I was thinking about when I was pregnant with my first child, and how pregnancy is especially that first one, is so special. And what are some ways that we can, it says those commandments are supposed to be on our heart first. I think to myself, then, and when you have a new baby, you're spending a lot of time nursing your baby and holding your baby. That was a perfect time to dive deep into the Torah, into the entire scriptures, and get it sealed on your heart how precious it is. And just make it a high priority, so that you're thinking about it so much that it naturally comes out of your mouth in your conversations with the little baby. I mean, I love having conversations with a baby. I love looking into their eyes and just carrying on a conversation. There's nothing better than doing that with a little one. And you can start at birth, that first golden hour, you're holding your little newborn, and you just start having a conversation about how they're loved. Yehovah knew their name, and it just makes me want to cry, frankly. But I think sometimes in our culture, the temptation is for a pregnant woman, a nursing mom, to spend her entire life on social media. And, if I could just urge those moms to quiet the voices outside and to spend those hours. She'll never get those back. You never have that uninterrupted time again. And
Yeah.
just to spend it in the word so that it pours out of you and overflows. So, when your children start to crawl, you can immediately apply all the things that you've learned, and then, going on. Anyway, those were my thoughts for those early years. Do you have anything you want to add?
I mean, that's so true. And actually, even before you have kids, I mean, or before you get pregnant, now is the time to fill your cup to the top.
Mm-hmm.
Fill up
Mm-hmm.
to the top and keep it full. And, something that I will mention is that when I was a new Christian, I got taught that, what some of the most important things you need to do are quiet time, prayer and Bible reading, and that's true. But when you've got toddlers underfoot,
Yes.
and it can be hard. I went through a guilt period when my kids were little, because I would go into my prayer closet to have my quiet time, and 5 minutes later I was asleep.
All right. No, true. That's really true.
And then I would wake up at the end of my hour and I'm like, oh no, I missed the whole thing.
Right. But see, to me, that's the beautiful time. You've got toddlers. It doesn't say we have to have personal, private devotions. We can just do it with our children. It's breakfast time.
Exactly.
It's lunchtime. Yeah. The Jews have a tradition that it's called Torah at the table. You never sit at the table for food without also partaking of spiritual food. It's Torah at the table. It's just such a beautiful thing.
That's awesome. See, that's what the Lord taught me. I would feel guilty for missing my quiet time, but you know what? I was at rest in my daddy's arms, and he let me sleep.
Exactly. He says, you need that. You need that.
And it was beautiful. And I learned how to talk to him while I was doing dishes and hanging laundry and everything else. And it helped me break out of that legalism, I guess you might say.
Yes.
But, involving your kids in that too. I mean, that's just, that is the definition of relationship and not religion. That's the definition. And that's how our kids learn to have a living relationship with Yehovah. And then, of course, now I'm in this season of my life. My kids don't live at home. It's just me and my husband, and I have free time all day long. Now I have time to really dig deep into the Word, like we were talking about. And I have lots of time to study and worship and spend time with the Father, just one-on-one, so that it is true that we go through seasons. And do not despise the season that you're in, because there's a value to it,
right.
And don't long for the seasons. Be content in the season you're at, because it's a gift.
Yes.
And
Amen.
And you'll get there. There'll be other seasons, and you'll get there.
Yes. Yes. Oh, amen. Amen. Well, I think we could go. I mean, wisdom is a little bit like the universe. There's no end to it, but I suppose we better wrap up.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope that our stories help people, because to me, stories are just such a beautiful way to learn. I hear your stories and I think about them all week after you've told me them. And it's a little easier to apply it to our lives, and we can hear practically, how did Christine do this at her house when her little ones were, it's so much more applicable. So I hope that's a blessing to people.
Me too.